thought and a dream, and now it's a reality. And 1989 was when this building was first occupied. Interesting that the year before, 1988, a song came out and sung by a guy named Bobby McFerrin. Now, you go back 35 years. How many of you go back 35 years? Not too many, right? Oh, okay, a few of you. Okay. 35 years ago, this song was written. It was on the radio. It's called Don't Worry, Be Happy. Don't Worry, Be Happy was the song. And we were singing that in 1988. And we were singing it in 1989, imagine, when we came here. And none of us would argue with the fact that we shouldn't worry, but what about just be happy? Well, let me, just to get you warmed up, here are some of the lyrics. Now, I don't speak Jamaican, but I'll do my best. Here's a little song I wrote. You might want to sing it a note for note. Don't worry, be happy. In every life we have some trouble, but when you worry, you make it double. Don't worry, be happy. The landlord say your rent is late. He may have to litigate. Don't worry, be happy. Ain't got no cash, ain't got no style, ain't got no gal to make you smile. Don't worry, be happy. Because when you worry, your face will frown, and that will bring everybody down. So don't worry, be happy. Don't worry, be happy now. Remember that song? I want to challenge you to think about that song now in the fact that worry is something we try and strive not to do. Worry is something that just does bring you down. It turns your smile into a frown. Your trouble doubles when you worry, just like that song. But I'd like you to turn to Daniel chapter 3. Daniel is a book that maybe you don't study. You studied it in school, Sunday school. And I do appreciate Zach and all the workers that work there and with our kids. Great work they do. And this particular chapter follows chapter 2, obviously, and follows chapter 1. If you remember, Daniel starts out telling us the story of these young Jewish teenagers, basically, when Nebuchadnezzar came over from Babylon and invaded the southern kingdom, which was all that was left because the northern kingdom got taken away by Assyria, never to be seen or heard of again. The Hebrews that were left were taken hostage by the Babylonians. Now, Babylonia was where Iraq is now. It's almost 900 miles east of Israel. So it was a 900-mile truck from Israel to Babylon. Capital now, I think, is Baghdad, but the capital there was Babylon. And they captured these young teenagers, Daniel being one of them. Remember the three friends? Shadrach, Meshach. You guys did well in Sunday school. You've heard that story. His three buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were among them. And why did King Nebuchadnezzar take them? Well, in his crazed ego, he said, I'll take the best young people from the nation of Israel. I'm going to take them from the generation, the dynasty of David. They're going to be of the race of David. I'm going to take the best and the youngest, and I'm going to parade them around all of Babylon. Say, look what we did. We humiliated them. We took their children, their best children from them. That's how King Nebuchadnezzar thought. And so chapter 1 is the introduction to the children and the lifestyle there. They refused to eat the food that probably was being dedicated to gods. And they convinced the people there that, hey, they could just skip a meal and still be strong, and they were. So a miracle in chapter 1. Chapter 2 is when Nebuchadnezzar had this big dream, and none of his magicians could solve it. And, somebody said, I think that Daniel guy, he's kind of smart. And so just to summarize chapter 2, Daniel comes to the rescue. King Nebuchadnezzar asks them, I don't want you to interpret the dream. I want you to tell me what I dreamt. That's kind of hard, isn't it? Don't just interpret it. Tell me what I dreamt last night. It'd be hard to do, isn't it? Well, Daniel said, well, my God can do that. And Daniel interpreted the king's dream. He told him what his dream was and then interpreted it. And he told him about this big statue. And he says, your dream had a big statue in it? Yeah, it did. And the head was gold. Yeah, it was. And he described all the pieces of the statue. It went from gold to silver to steel and clay. And that was a prophecy of the preceding generations of kingdoms that were going to come after Babylon. But good news, King Nebi, your kingdom is gold. But you know what? All the others are going to come right behind you. And he loved it. He loved that interpretation, and it was true. So that leads us now. So David was recognized. He was promoted. His three friends were promoted. They are all part of sort of the honored foreigners of Babylon. Now we're in chapter 3. Chapter 3. And this is the story I'm sure you studied, learned, saw pictures of. You might have seen a picture, like that. I'm going to break this down into 3 parts. And they all start with F. Fear, faith, and fire. Okay, I think we can break this down easily into those 3 parts. Fear, faith, and fire. If you remember that, if you can, great. So I'm going to read verse 1 through 7, and that's the first part. This is all about fear. Verse 1, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and its breadth 6 cubits. He sent it up on a plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, and the counselors, and the treasurers, and the justices, and the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Right now, verse 1 and 2 describe a statue. Now, where did he get that idea? This is probably 15, 20 years later. He says, you know what? I'm going to build a statue. I like that dream. And I like that fact that it was gold on top. Let's make one big old statue that's all gold. And you guys, you could worship it. Okay? There's where his mind was. Remember, he was completely impressed how God used Daniel to interpret the dream in chapter 2, but 10, 15, 20 years later, completely forgot about Daniel's God, looked at himself and said, you know what? I deserve a statue. It was actually 60 cubits, which is 90 feet tall, and 6 cubits wide. So that would be 9 feet, 9 by 9 by 9, and 90 feet high. So I'm picturing like a lighthouse. Those are usually about that tall. Okay, stood out. The plain of Dura was pretty flat, so everybody could see it. This gold statue. Now, it probably wasn't solid gold because back then they just couldn't get that much. Gold plated, but it was still pretty impressive, I'm sure. So that's the image that he sets up, and all of his governors, all of his cabinet were on board. Of course they were. You don't say no to King Nebuchadnezzar. So verse 2 describes the setting. Verse 3, then the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the counselors and the treasurers and the justices and the magistrates, and I don't know why they list them all like that, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Verse 4 and 5. And the herald, the guy who makes all the big announcements, he says, you are commanded, O people, nations, languages, and when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. So the herald gives the announcement. Here's the instructions. Here's how this is going to work. When you hear the orchestra playing, whenever you hear it, stop where you are, fall on your face, and worship the statue. Okay? Now, nobody's fooled to think, well, that we're worshiping the statue, you're really worshiping King Nebuchadnezzar, right? Why else would he put that up there? So they're worshiping, and here's where the fear comes, doesn't it? Why would you not do that? What do you think might happen to you if you didn't? The king is telling you, his whole cabinet is telling you. Here's the fear. The fear is, I guess I better. I mean, what would King Nebuchadnezzar do? I don't even want to think what he might do if I don't bow down when I hear that music. So the herald tells the story. He gives the command, verse 6, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a BFF. That's not best friends forever. BFF, a burning, fiery furnace. So there's the fear. I knew he was going to do something. If we don't do this, what's he going to do? Well, he's just going to throw us in the big furnace, the thing that they melt the gold in. They'll throw us in there. Fear. Is this love for the king? Is this because you really like the king? You love statues? No, it's fear. And verse 7, therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So there you have it. When the music started, when the orchestra began, everybody did exactly what the king wanted them to do. Fell on their face and worshiped. Now, what do you call fear when it produces more fear? Doesn't fear just produce more fear? When you're scared, does just like any little thing now make you more afraid? When you see one spider, I'm seeing spiders all over the place now, you know. Fear produces fear. And fear is produced by, in this case, peer pressure. Ever had peer pressure? Remember what that was like? Does it happen as adults? I grew up in this church. A lot of you grew up in this church, or you grew up in a church. And I remember real early we had some business. The church would do business, and people would vote. And later on, I learned something interesting. I heard about the thing called secret ballot. And I thought, well, why do we have secret ballots? Why don't we just all raise our hand? I'm in favor. No, I'm not in favor. And I learned something about peer pressure at church. Even in church, we have safeguards to say, you know what, if we have an idea to do something, rather than have everybody raise their hand because you know what happens, 99% of the people raise their hand and you say, I don't like that idea. Should I raise my hand? Oh, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should. Am I going to look silly? Am I going to get, some consequences if I don't raise my hand? Or if I do raise my hand and everybody else isn't? So there's nothing really bad about that. I mean, we do it because we want to make sure everything's fair and no one's being influenced by anybody else. I got it, But I thought, that's a little bit of peer pressure, isn't it? There was a research thing went on. They picked 5 people, and 4 of the 5 were in on the thing. They had these 5 guys. They're going to go into this closed room, and before they went in, the 4 who were in on it were told, "Here's a picture of 3 lines, and they're all exactly the same length. When you go in that room, I want you to pretend like they're different heights, that this one's a little bigger and this one's a little smaller. And the 5th guy isn't going to know what's going on. And so they filmed it, and they have the 5 guys in there. And the 4 guys were saying, oh, yeah, those things, or this one's really this much bigger. That's slightly bigger, and this one's just slightly smaller. And they were very convincing. And the 5th guy was going, what? They're all the same. And more times than not, the 5th guy folded. He went along with the 5. He said, well, I guess they could be all different. When you knew that he was saying, no, they're not. Because there was 4 other people in there. Fear of peer pressure. And that's what's going on here. And that's what happens to us as well, even as adults. And I'm seeing that a lot in churches and elsewhere. I see the big mega churches. I think, why are they so big? Maybe it's a little bit of this stuff. Maybe it's a little bit of, I better go to this big church. Makes me like everybody else. I'm just making that out as a suggestion. I'm not condemning any churches. But I'm thinking, why are they so big? Why do so many people? So think about that, but think about that personally. Is fear driving you? Is fear producing more fear? And is some of the fear coming from peer pressure? Okay. And one other thing, before we get to the next section. Fear produces fear, and these folks were told to worship the statue. What does worship mean? We worship here, right? This is what we're doing now. Right now, we're worshiping. What? How do you describe it? We say that all the time. I say it all the time. Let's have a great worship service, right? What is worship? Here is a good definition. Worship is due him. Worship is a response to the work of God. Worship is a humble posture of the heart. Worship is a grateful, appreciative act. And worship is our purpose. Our purpose in life is to worship, isn't it? Would you agree? Our purpose is to worship. Our purpose is to be grateful and appreciative, to humble ourselves when we worship, and to respond. It's just should be a natural response. It's not something we have to do. Oh, it's time to worship. We better do it. Everybody's worshiping. Peer pressure. No. We worship because of what he's done. And let me give you some scripture. If you want to go to Hebrews 12, that's the last verse. But the rest of these are in the Psalms. Psalm 29:2 says, "Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness." That's a call to worship, isn't it? Psalm 96:9 says, "Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth." Psalm 95:6 says, "Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker." And then listen to Hebrews 12:28. "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken," since we're receiving a kingdom that can't be shaken, let us be thankful. Well, yes. Do we forget that we're receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken? Shouldn't we be thankful? Shouldn't we be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe? Hebrews 12:28. It's a great verse. So what is worship? It's the object of your worship that's most important, isn't it? Their worship as Babylonians was keep King Nebuchadnezzar happy. Our object is to give glory and thanks and honor to who made us. Remember, he's the potter, we're the clay. All right, so that's fear. Fear is part of this story. Fear is part of our story, unfortunately. Fear is our problem where we need to just let go and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to live by faith. But before we get to faith, verse 8 through 12. 8 through 12, I labeled agents of fear. You know, there are agents of fear. Verse 8, "Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews.
They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn and the pipe and the lyre and the trigon and the harp and the bagpipe and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the BFF, the burning fiery furnace." Verse 12, "There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." So the agents of fear are these Chaldeans who were magicians, and they were probably unemployed or displaced by Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. They got their jobs, so maybe they were bitter. But they were what you would call snitches, tattletale, squealing. They told the king, "Hey, these three guys, look what they did." Agents of fear. We have to be reminded that there are people out there who will use fear to get to us. But the key is, fear comes from peer pressure. Fear is hard work. It's hard work to be a liar, isn't it? 1 John 5, which we just finished up, first and second and third John. John 5:3 says, "For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome." So if you're fearful all the time, that's a burden. If you're always looking around behind your back or lying or covering up things, that's hard. And you know what's a lot less burdensome? Tell the truth. Follow his commandments. Now, second part of that section I call the moment of truth, verses 13, 14, and 15. We all have a moment of truth sooner or later. Listen to verse 13. "Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, 'Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you did not serve my gods and worship the golden image that I've set up?' Now," king is giving these guys a second chance, verse 15. "Now if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn and the pipe and the lyre and the trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every other kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I've made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God, little g, who will deliver you out of my hands?" The king is saying, once I do that, it's over. How are you going to get out of that one? You're going to be burning up, and I don't know of any God, big or small, who gets you out. Moment of truth come. If you walk by faith, sooner or later, someone's going to say, "Hey, don't you go to that church over there? Or what do you think about Jesus? Are you one of those Jesus freaks? Are you one of those holy rollers? Have you ever had that encounter?" They're calling you out. And we need to be called out, and we should be called out. And when we are, we should respond as they did. And let's read that. Verse 16. Verse 16 starts the second part, which is faith. Listen to what they said. Verse 16. "Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego answered and said to the king, 'O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king.'" Whoa, look out. "But if not," and verse 18 is extremely important, "but if not, If it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship your golden image that you have set up. Even if God doesn't deliver us from the fiery furnace, we still will not serve you. The threat doesn't work. The faith in Nebuchadnezzar was tested. So what is faith? We've worshiped and we've learned what worship is. Now, we really do need to understand, well, what does it mean to have faith? Warren Wiersbe says it this way: faith means obeying God regardless of the feelings within us, the circumstances around us, and the consequences before us. True faith isn't frightened by threats, impressed by crowds, or swayed by superstitious ceremonies. Isn't that faith? It's nothing from the outside. Faith is entirely internal. Faith is our object. If the object of our faith is what's most important. If the object of your faith is pleasing King Nebuchadnezzar, well, he came and he went. Our faith is in the object of God, the living God, the personal God, the eternal God, the loving God, who will be around forever. That's the object of our faith. If you have faith at all, that's where it should be directed. At the person, Jesus Christ, God eternal, God loving, God saving. Now, they could have done this, okay? They could have said, these three teenagers, well, we will fall down but not actually worship the idol. Like, we'll go ahead and do it anyway, but we'll pretend like we're not. We'll pretend like we're doing it, but we're not going to do it. They didn't use that excuse. They could have said, we won't become idol worshipers, but we will worship just this one time, and then ask God for forgiveness. Have you heard that excuse? I'll just do this one time, and then I'll ask God to forgive me, and it'll all be okay. They didn't do that. Another one, the king has absolute power. We must obey him. God will understand. Is that a good excuse? They didn't use that, did they? There's so many. They could have said, we're not hurting anybody. Where's the harm? They didn't use that one. And they didn't use this one. If we get ourselves killed and some pagans take over our jobs, they won't help our people in the exile. That's kind of good, but they didn't use it. And we shouldn't either. Maybe what they were thinking was Isaiah 41:10. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed. For I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Maybe that's what they were thinking. Or maybe they were thinking also in Isaiah, because Isaiah had already written this. 43:2 of Isaiah. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. This is Isaiah. Maybe that's what they were thinking. So faith. The teenagers had faith. What comes after faith? Fire. Verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury. The expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter. This guy's mad. 7 times hotter. One commentator said that was kind of dumb because that would kill him faster. He should have lowered it so they could suffer a little bit. But 7 times hotter. Verse 20. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and had cast them into the BFF, the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks and their tunics, their hats and their other garments, and were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Verse 22. But the king's order was urgent. He was in a hurry. So he had the furnace overheated, and it was so overheated the flame of the fire killed the men who were shoving Shadrach and Meshach into the furnace. So even the guys who were taking them up to the thing, they died. That's how hot it was. Verse 23. Then these, how many? 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell. They were tied up. They had all kinds of clothes on. I don't know why they put all these clothes on them. Tied them up, fell bound into the BFF, the burning fiery furnace. Now, between 23 and 24, there's an interesting thing that might have happened. The Septuagint is a really old translation. And in that translation, I read that there was singing going on. Now, doesn't go to the English version, but I really kind of like that. That why did Nebuchadnezzar, he's walking away from the furnace, why did he turn around? Was he morbidly curious? I wonder what it's going to look like when they burn up. No, he was walking away and he turned and came back and looked down. Why do you think? Is it possible that they could have been singing down there? Can you imagine having a praise service down in the BFF? I like to think so. Something made the king turn around. The king turned around in verse 24. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. He rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Hey, did we not cast 3 men bound in the fire?" And what did they say? And they answered, "Oh, true, true, king. Yep, absolutely, 1, 2, 3. Verse 25. He answered and said, "But I see 4. I see 4 unbound, walking in the midst of the fire. And they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods." To me, that just blows me away. The 4th is like the son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar, he came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High, the high God, come out. Come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. In verse 27, and the satraps, here's the list again, and the prefects, and the governors, and the king's counselors, and gathered together and saw the fire, had not any power over their bodies, and the hair on their heads were not singed. Their cloaks were not harmed. And to top it all off, no smell of smoke. Now, wouldn't you think, just a little bit of, nope, not even a smell of smoke. Wow. Fire. Now, I'm going to finish up the chapter right now, and then we're going to talk about fire. Verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command." He's nailing it, isn't he? They set aside the king's command. They yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. I mean, what a transformation. And he keeps going, verse 29. "Therefore, I, King Nebuchadnezzar, make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against God, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, shall be torn limb from limb." Okay, so he's still kind of crazy. But he says, if you speak ill of the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you'll be killed, and your houses laid to ruin. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Now, that's your Sunday school story. But there's so much more there, isn't there? What about fire? We know that fear produces fear. We know fear also is produced by peer pressure. Pressure to do this or that. And it should be faith. Faith drives us. Faith driven by the object. The object of our faith is God, the living God, the eternal God. But occasionally, and probably more than occasionally, we're going to run to fire. Fire produces what? In this case, fellowship, another F. These three teenagers enjoyed the fellowship of, most likely, Jesus, the pre-incarnate Jesus, in the middle of a fire, fellowship inside the fire, not outside, not before, not after, during. How does that relate to some of the things we go through? I came up with a list of things that might be described as fire in our lives as Christians. How about disappointment? Disappointment is difficult, but God is with us in the midst of disappointment. Disease, death, loss, loneliness. These are all fires that we have to go through. And you know what? We're not alone. Just like those boys, God is with us through the fire and out the other side. One last thing, we're almost out of time. The great illustration I read about a chaplain during World War II. He was often thrust in the front lines of battle, where his ministry to the troops endangered his life. One day, while him and his army was moving through France, Chaplain Kennedy, and his name is Stoddard Kennedy, Captain Kennedy wrote a letter to his 10-year-old son. Here's the little note that he wrote to his son. The first prayer I want my son to learn to say for me is not, God, keep Daddy safe, but God, make Daddy brave. And if he has hard times to do, make him strong to do it. Son, life and death don't matter, but right and wrong do. Life and death don't matter, right and wrong do. He continued, Daddy dead is Daddy still, but Daddy dishonored before God is something too awful for words. I suppose you would like to put in a bit about safety too, and Mother would like that, I'm sure. Well, put in it afterwards, for it really doesn't matter nearly as much as doing what is right. Now, this chaplain wanted to tell his little boy, hey, I might die, but I'm doing the right thing. And that's what these ancient words are telling us. Do the right thing. Obey God's commandments. Tell the truth. Love one another as yourself. And the fire won't burn you. You'll go through the fire, but he'll be with you. So the story of Daniel and his friends. It's a great book. Reread it. A few chapters later, there's the lion's den. That's a great story too. So let's pray. Thank you so much, Lord, for blessing us with your word. These ancient words, they remind us of so much. Even Psalm 23 that was read reminds us that we can go into the darkest pathways. You are with us, comforting us and giving us reassurance. Bless each one here who might be going through a fire right now. Take care of them, bless them, help them, Lord, to be rejoicing, singing choruses, even though they're going through it. Thank you again for this time. Bless the week ahead. Bless our time as we continue to worship. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.